Hey everyone, welcome back to Johnny Can't Sleep. This is a podcast that is dedicated to those thoughts you have at night when you can't fall asleep and your brain wanders to all these weird places and you think about some interesting thoughts and maybe you wonder what other people may be thinking about if they were to have those same thoughts. We have a lot of different topics we're going to go through. We'll probably be filming a lot of episodes in the near future. And today we are going to talk about time travel. Have you ever thought about time travel? Like, if time travel did exist, where would you go? What would you do? And we're going to talk a little bit about that and get some people's input. I'm your host, Dustin. And today, joining me, we have my sister Ashley and my brother in law, Steve. So we are going to see what their thoughts are on things, and we'll always have a mixture of some different guests that have some interesting and fun things to say, and we'll try to have a lot of fun on the podcast and have a good time discussing these topics and hopefully have a lot of laughs too. So anyhow, so I was thinking about this one with a couple different scenarios. Like, if you could travel forward or backward in time, and if you could just observe things that were going on, maybe you don't interact with the timeline, you're not trying to change the timeline, but see something that maybe you've always wondered. That would be one scenario. The other scenario, I was thinking, if you traveled forward or backward in time and you wanted to either stay there or interact with people, where would you go and what would you do? And so those are the couple of scenarios that we were kind of thinking about. And I guess we'll start out with, where would you go if you were just going to observe things, and maybe things you've always wondered or you've wanted to see for yourself, or things that you've thought, oh, it might be cool if I was living during this time to see this. So anyhow, let's start with you, Ashley. Where would you go if you were just going to travel in time? You're going to observe things.
If I was just traveling in time, I think I've always wanted to see ancient Egypt, and well, I've always wanted to see present day Egypt, but especially if I could see ancient Egypt and their civilizations and what were they actually doing. So, what was the significance of their pyramids? They say that there's so many things that have to do with numerology and that they don't understand how they had the technology to build them. And they say that they were actually built thousands and thousands of years ago, way earlier than what some people would claim. And and then they're saying that each block was moved hundreds of miles because what they're made of is something that had to have been mined from so far away from where they were constructed that
Hmm.
gosh, I don't remember how many thousands of pounds they were, but it's levels that have never been moved by any one person ever or even a team of people. And so nobody knows how this was done. And so what I would want to know is, how was that done? And there's even people that say, and I don't know if you believe this, but that there may have been people that have different abilities or even like giants
Yeah.
who were
Yeah.
able to move them. And so it's like, how did that happen? And then they were built so perfectly, and they were built to where you could see certain things with like with astrology, and it's
Yep.
nobody
Yeah.
really knows.
The
That's an interesting one too, I think, because I thought about that also, like, well, what year do you go back to? But you could definitely go back to a certain point and be like, okay, are the pyramids there now?
Yeah.
Because there's people that say, oh, they were built before the Egyptians. So, you go back 3000 BC or whatever, you say, okay, they're there, they're not there yet, and go back and forth and
Yeah.
try to figure out,
It's something that I
when they're
heard.
being built and how they're building them. That would be
Yeah.
crazy to
I
see.
heard that they could have been 10,000 years old. Is that what
Yeah.
you had heard too?
Yeah, I've heard that. It's kind of crazy. But
the
then you're like, what previous civilization could have built something like that? There's people that say aliens built them before or
Oh
whatever,
yeah. Oh yeah.
and so it's like, it's just a weird thing. I mean, it's hard to to dispute things like that.
Mhm.
The coordinates of the Great Pyramid of Giza, so the latitude and longitude is the identical number to the speed of light. You know that?
Oh, I've heard that.
So
And
whatever that,
they're
What does
like, if
that mean?
it's just quite a wild coincidence is all. I mean, to think like the speed of light,
And so it makes you think, did they know what the speed of
right,
light was when they built it?
right. And but what's weird is was latitude and longitude a thing then either? Is that just a mere coincidence? Because when did latitude and longitude get invented? Was it around 10,000 years ago, or
But
did it get invented in coordination with the pyramids? You
yeah,
know,
but or did all that what did all that exist and then all these like wasn't there a giant library in Alexandria? I know there were lots of libraries throughout the world that were burned to the ground and they
yeah,
said like hundreds of years, maybe thousands of scientific advancements were lost every time that a
yep,
city would get like conquered and they would burn it to the ground.
they burned to the
yeah.
ground.
Well, I
Yeah.
think with that library at Alexandria, Egypt, I think they said that like the inventions and the scrolls and everything in there that had all this scientific stuff on them when that got burned to the ground, that we lost 1,000 years of technology and innovation. Yeah, that is kind of crazy when you think about it. The pyramids is definitely one of those things where you kind of think about if you could go back and forth. You might have to go back and forth in time a few times to different times to see
Yeah.
when the pyramids finally are there.
And if you had all that information too, it would be so confusing because then it would like what you would know or not, or find out or not find out could then sort of change things that we may have believed our whole lives. It
Yep.
could turn a lot of things on its head that people have been, believing.
About so what about this happened a couple months ago and it completely they talked all about it and then nobody talked about it anymore is the fact that under the pyramids are like these I don't know what were they 120-meter long cylinders that are directly under the pyramids with like spiral. You remember that?
Yeah,
Like they did like that lidar and they said yeah there's some kind of the pyramids got these columns underneath that have this spiral structure inside of them because a lot of people say that the pyramids at one time were power plants.
yeah,
Oh,
Like world, like wireless internet, basically, like stuff we have today, they had back then. I think, Dustin, that Ashley's topic is going to lead us to like a whole nother podcast of ancient
yeah.
civilizations and the Anunnaki and all these crazy things that
Oh yeah, yeah,
they're, when we think about it, like just because of what we know, right, what we've been taught our whole lives, but then you stop and think, like, kind of makes sense a little bit, right? Like
yeah,
that's kind of wild. So,
well, and if we could do it now, why couldn't have they done it then, especially if
yeah.
so much of progress of the human race was
Well,
lost over
I
wars.
think Nikola Tesla basically said that
Mhm.
the pyramids were built like that for energy purposes,
yeah,
and he knew
When they say
he
he had
figured
time
out
to
some various things about him. But then I think when he died or whatever, like they don't know what happened to a lot of his trunks of his stuff.
he
And I
came
got
and like
another side
took it.
story on that we'll
Mhm.
get into toward
you,
the end, which is kind of crazy.
you
But
know who got you know who got most of his stuff?
Trump.
Donald Trump's grandpa,
yeah, so
Yeah.
I
uncle.
have a story on that, and
Yeah,
I'll go through the details because there's more to it than a lot of people realize, which is kind of crazy.
the,
So
the travels of Baron Trump.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, the book that was written that mirrors everything. Yeah, that's crazy though.
it is pretty crazy. So where would you go, Steve? Where would you want to go or check out?
So mine would be, and well, in my opinion, it wouldn't be to uncover a mystery, but see something that everybody would want to see. Is I would want to be outside of the tomb on Christ's resurrection
Yeah,
to actually see it. Like I don't have any doubt that it happened, but I can't think of any other event in history that would be as
yeah,
powerful and awesome, right? Like maybe it's
sure.
more. I don't know. I don't, to me, there's no mystery. A lot of people would disagree with that it didn't happen or it didn't happen
Hmm.
as, but um, I can't think of any. This is just for observation purposes. Now
Sure, sure.
we get me change the timeline. I'm going to come a little more aggressive with it, but
Yeah,
just seeing and observing to see that and
Like
just
being one of the Roman soldiers that was sitting outside
sitting
and
out guarding the tomb. Yeah, just
Mhm.
let me sit there and just see that. I can't think of anything else that, again, nothing you'd want to be able to change. That would be the one. And then to come back, and I guess I don't know how many people would believe that I time traveled, but if so, I
yeah,
guess in this question, like, is time travel real and people know that I actually did it, or are they going to tell me that I'm crazy? Like, yeah, right, crazy guy, like you did time travel.
yeah,
So, but what? Let's put it in the perspective of time travel's real, it's proven, and then that's where I go. And like,
yeah, yeah.
oh, it was real, it happened, right? So, that would be mine. So,
Gotcha.
do you
And I
think
think there's even a little bit of a dispute about like what year he died and stuff like that too. But if time travel was real, you could go back and forth and finally
2032
arrive at
or
the right
something like
year and time and observe things. But
or
yeah,
what
it's
year it would
interesting.
be? I don't know why I said 2032, 32 AD.
yeah,
Yeah.
Is that about
it's
right?
So this is crazy though, because I just saw something the other day about what they call the phantom time hypothesis, and it has to do with when they changed the calendars over from like the Julian calendar created by Julius Caesar to the Gregorian calendar, which was a pope and the
yep.
Catholic
We
Church trying to get things back into sync and change some things. So I just ran into some stuff the other day, but so there's a theory that maybe like 300 years didn't exist, like they were made up from the year 614 to like 911.
yep.
But
That's
why?
They don't exist. Like it was made up supposedly. Now I got to do a little bit more research on this, and this would be kind of a fun episode to do in the future at some point. But if that's true, it was done because of certain rulers of like the Byzantine Empire and the Pope wanting to rule in the new millennium, and they adjusted things to the year 1000 and
Like the first pope or something?
no, I think there have been popes for a long time. I'm not great at some of that. I
Mhm.
think there were popes way, way back. But
Oh wow.
anyhow, but it was, things were getting out of whack a bit with the calendar, and it was like they just, according to this German guy from maybe 100 years ago or so, I can't remember when this hypothesis came out, but then they went through and they're like, well, in that 300 years, there wasn't really any castles built. There wasn't really any archaeological evidence. There's not really anything tying anything to this period. There's in a lot of the European and probably Middle East and a lot of stuff like that. So that's
Yeah.
something I need to look up a little bit more details about to kind of see what the deal is with that possible theory and stuff too, because it's kind of an interesting one. But obviously that could affect time travel if some years were
Mhm.
just made up and not real. So it's interesting. But
I think everything that we know is subject to being questioned at this point.
oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Just as a side note, the first pope, I didn't know this, was Saint Peter the Apostle. So Peter, the
Yeah,
disciple of, was the first pope who died in 64. The year
yeah.
64 was recognized as the early Christian church, a leader of 12 disciples, and by the Roman Catholic Church as the first of its unbroken succession of popes. So since 64 AD,
That's what I was
um,
thinking. Like for almost a couple thousand years that there's been popes. So
I've seen that where they say that years were added, where years were deleted, where things were just like how easy would that have been? Because how many people, like, where did you get a calendar, right?
yeah,
Like, and who would dispute it? And if they go in and they kill a bunch of people or they take over, like, no, it's, you thought it was this year, it's really this
yeah,
year, you know.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
It's interesting thoughts. I know, like I was thinking, like if I could go and I could observe, there's a few things that popped up in my mind too. Like it might be kind of cool to see like Paul Revere's Midnight Ride.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, warning of the British coming, you know, because you know what night that would be. If you had a time machine, you're like, I go to this exact date and you know where it is. So I thought that would be kind of interesting to see. You have all this historical stuff that tells you exactly what was done and said, and you just kind of actually see it in
Really just
action.
like the British are coming and
Yeah,
riding in on the horse and everyone
Yeah.
coming out.
yeah, see what people's response
Mhm.
was, what the whole situation kind of
Mhm.
shaped up to be. Or like the Mayflower arriving at Plymouth Rock and people getting off of the Mayflower. We know what day they landed. That would be just kind of cool to see that whole experience, getting off the ship onto the new land and what
Imagine how
they did.
scary it was for the Native Americans not knowing what the hell that was and
Yeah,
all these different people there and with guns and all kinds of things that they had never seen.
yeah, it would be. And I think they had people there before because I think there were some Native Americans that actually spoke English at that point. So
Oh,
I think like
1600.
Squanto or some Native American guide, I believe that before they came with all the people, then I don't know, that kind of helped bridge the gap between the native people and one of the native people that actually could speak English. But that whole
oh, wow.
scenario and situation would still be cool to just see it unfold.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the Vikings too. If you could go to that area in Newfoundland in Canada where they say there's a Viking longhouse or remains of it from like 1000 AD or something like that. Say you go to I don't know 1050, 1100 AD or whatever to see if it's there and if it really is a Viking longhouse that was abandoned, or see what's around there or what the situation looked
Yeah.
like. But you know, that'd be one of those things that I was thinking about too. Like if you arrived at a time where there was Vikings there, I mean, how do you even know what Vikings really look like? They don't have the little horns on the helmets, you know, like everybody paints them out to be. But what would the real Vikings look like? To be big shaggy beards. They're on the sea for a long time. They big burly guys. But I mean, how would
I
you look at
think
someone and say, "Oh yeah, yeah, those are Vikings"? Would you really be able to tell or no?
Well,
if
if
any
they
of
talk
us
about
did time travel, I think we would be shocked by like the sights and the smells, the
oh
Yeah,
god,
food, so
yeah,
many things that we take for granted that are just life today.
yeah,
yeah. So that's talk about like Columbus landed in like obviously 1492, and then the Pilgrims in like 16 whatever. But the Vikings, they were in Newfoundland in year 1000. They sail all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. They find Newfoundland. They don't like go anywhere else. Like, come on, like that's
yeah.
where you want. Like, they were the first. How far did they go down? Like, if you
Well,
travel across the Atlantic Ocean for however many months it would take in their boats, right? Then you hit
yeah,
land. You're like, oh, this is cool. I'm good. No, they're probably gonna like. Why would they not explore more? And they were in the
yeah.
business of taking what they wanted, right? Like they would just
Well,
found and be like, oh, this is it. This is all there is.
yeah.
Sail down the coast. Like they follow the coast and be like, what else can we take?
I think there's a lot of people that think that they made it to Minnesota. And
Mm-hmm. Yes,
there's the
still there.
Scandinavian rune stone there from like
Yeah.
1362 or
They
something. I can't
probably
remember exactly,
did.
but somewhere in the 1300s. And a lot of
Yep.
people thought that rune stone that was found there was totally fake, but
Yeah.
because they're like, oh well, the guy that found it happened to be Scandinavian. You're like, do you realize that Minnesota was pretty much settled by people from Scandinavia? So if someone around 1900 found it, the chances of them being of Scandinavian descent were probably close to 100%.
Right.
So it's like that doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
But
Ooh, I
yeah,
just
It
thought.
doesn't prove
that's
that it
you
was
know
a hoax
kind of
because
crazy.
Uh,
The other thing I thought about that would be kind of cool, that's a little bit more recent, would be being in the San Francisco Bay Area, like the night of the Alcatraz escape in like 1963, to see if the guys actually really made it to shore. But I don't know where you go because they could have made it to shore about three different spots or whatever, or to be in a boat out
Oh,
in the
seagull.
bay
Yeah,
just
Yeah.
to
'cause
see,
they made didn't they make their boats out of raincoats
yeah, they made them out of raincoats and
and
Yep.
swim and went through great white shark infested
That's what
waters?
I said. Maybe
yeah.
you just three dudes get eaten by a great white shark.
That might be it. I
Yeah.
think they made it. I
I
think they
think
did
they
all that
did
and I think they
too.
made it.
I think there's reasons to think that they did make it. And I think like I can't remember where it was, but somewhere around the bay, close to where the currents would have taken them that night, I think a car was stolen.
Hmm.
Not far from where they likely would have came to shore if they did make it to
Yeah.
shore. And then someone saw that car maybe an hour later on some other roads speeding with three guys in it.
Did stuff ever wash up?
So some of the stuff did wash up on like I think Angel Island or whatever,
Mhm.
one of the islands in the bay, and so I think because of that, people thought maybe they didn't make it. Maybe
But they would have
their
been
boat
smart enough
broke
to think
apart or
of that
whatever.
too. If
Yeah,
they planned all that, they would have been smart enough, I think, to think of how
yeah.
can we also throw people
One
off.
of the guys was like for IQ, he's in like the top 1 or 2%. Like the guy was just a genius. And so probably someone like that probably didn't leave anything to chance. But you
Yeah.
still, if you're getting in that cold water and you gotta make it, to shore or whatever, and gotta time it right. But I'm sure someone that's brilliant enough like that is probably gonna be able to make sure they time it right. But you also still have to be a good swimmer. But the two brothers were said to swim in Lake Michigan at times when the water was really cold because they were from I think up that way. So they were said to be very good swimmers. And I know they've had different demonstrations where people tried to swim from Alcatraz Island to Angel Island or to the shore, and people have done it.
Hmm.
They didn't they get a note out to a buddy to have a boat out there for them.
Hmm.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They could have had a boat out there. There was a boat that went back and forth taking the workers for Alcatraz, and there was also a extension cord that was missing from the shop that night. Well, maybe they just used the extension cord to tie it to the back of this
Boat.
boat that ferried people back and forth. And if it was dark and maybe wasn't noticed, and they just were pulled to the other side. So there's a lot of
What about
stuff there. I don't know.
standing in the woods underneath the plane where DB Cooper jumped from?
Yeah, that too. If you were able to be like on the plane, they know what plane. So if you were able to buy a ticket, get on the plane, sit in some other seat, and you know what's going to happen. So you just observe. Okay, where is he? And and see if it's like one of the suspects that they looked at for many years, or if it's somebody else.
Yeah, or just where he jumped out, just be in the woods. You could look up and see the plane and follow a parachute down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
It
okay,
was
there's a
pretty
plane.
dark though. I think it was super dark, so I don't know how well you'd be able to track someone coming down. But granted, he maybe had a disguise on, but because no one's been able to place him exactly. I know that's a challenging one. There was a guy that hijacked a plane I think around Salt Lake City or Denver, I can't remember, somewhere in that area, a year or two later. And they called him a copycat, but a lot of people think he was the original DB Cooper. And eventually, like he was in jail. Then I think he got away, and he died in an FBI shootout in the 70s. And if that was the case, then maybe that's why the FBI didn't pursue things super super heavily. If they're like, oh, we're pretty sure this is the guy, and now he's dead. But
Oh, I got one more.
what's that?
So be a fly in the wall, but I get to kind of hang out. And so I'm going to change the rules up a little bit. Is
Yeah,
to go like the 1930s in New York City at the height of the mafia,
yeah,
like 30s and 40s, and just like hang out with it, like just see what it was really like.
gotcha.
That would be.
Yeah,
I mean, come on, that'd be kind of fun. Like hang out with the original families, and just be like, hey.
yeah,
Eat their
There's
food.
there's so many times to watch it with like Dash is like just so many different times in history that'd be like crazy to see.
Mhm.
The more recent stuff is like we know because it's so well documented, though. Like the stuff that I like, I don't. There's a certain point in time where you can't really trust what actually happened for anything
Yeah,
because
I know.
so poorly documented and only so few people had.
And it's like, who are we relying on, the world order that's completely corrupt to tell us what
Yeah.
happened in history?
Yeah, you can't trust things as much anymore.
No.
Yeah.
I think that's the cool thing about if you were able to time travel, where you're like, I could just go see it for myself to see if what I've been told is actually
It's
true or
true.
real, or see what happened, the things that are just have always been speculated about, but no one really knows the truth.
We can go to Stanley Kubrick's studio, watch him film the moon landing. That'd be a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, see if the moon landing
Yeah,
was
that would be
faked or
good.
not, or gotcha. The other one I thought about too would be one of those mysteries would be go see who Jack the Ripper was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Obviously, they know the nights that certain things happened in certain alleyways and stuff like that, to just be an observer on the street and see if someone goes running away from an alley at a certain time and figure out where they're going or who they are without
Yeah.
them realizing anyone knows anything. That would be interesting. There's been so much speculation on who he was and if he was if it was covered up because he was a prominent person
I was
or if
gonna
it was
say,
just a
I think
situation where they just don't know.
I thought everything was pointing to that he was like a upper, like aristocratic, wealthy type of person that had
Yeah.
some type of knowledge of human anatomy and those
Yeah.
type of things, because back then it wasn't they didn't have encyclopedias and Google and medical journals that your average person could just learn.
Yeah.
You had to have been a little bit higher up there to know those things.
Oh, yeah, totally. So those were some of my thoughts. And then for the other one, interacting with the timeline, there was something I thought about. So a lot of people probably don't realize, I think back in 1894, uh, 4-year-old boy Adolf Hitler almost drowned and he was saved by some guy, and he fell through the ice into some icy water on some river, and someone was able to save him right away. You ever think about what if that person wasn't watching, wasn't paying attention, wasn't there, or someone interacted with the timeline and they're talking to that person instead and
Yeah.
he doesn't survive? Like, what would the world have been like? Would we have still eventually gone to war and all that kind of, stuff happen? Would someone else have just filled in as a evil ruler,
Yeah.
or would none of that happen and the whole Holocaust stuff never would have happened? I mean, it's sort of
Well,
like that butterfly effect thing where one tiny little thing could have affected
and I
a
think
ton of
with
history.
Hitler, like I think you're right. Like I actually believe that there wouldn't have been somebody that would have stepped in. There were people that were very evil, and I'm not saying more or less evil because like evil is evil. But he was able to influence so many people on such an unbelievable level. I don't know that
Yeah,
there would have been another Hitler in that time at that period.
yeah,
Maybe somewhere there were other people operating elsewhere in the world,
yeah,
but and then if you think about like the momentum that the world, that Europe was having at that time too, like Berlin was so vibrant and what's the word, progressive, and he basically shut down half of a continent basically,
yeah, yeah,
for decades and decades.
yeah. It's interesting, kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah. And how
So
many new leaders would have come out of those areas that were more forward thinking and freer? I was actually watching this documentary about Richard Ramirez, who was a
yeah,
like, notorious serial killer in California. And honestly, like one of the most horrifying serial killers, the way he had no like MO. He just, I mean, other than killing people,
yeah.
any
Yep.
age,
You know what?
Any
anything.
method, any
Yeah. And it's like that's horrifying. And so then it was going into his childhood, which was, horrible, of course. And it said that at one point his dad was very violent and awful.
So I don't know if you know this or not, but this is really weird that you brought up Richard Ramirez. But um, mom and dad's honeymoon, and they were at the San Diego Zoo, and there was a weird guy. They were there late. The zoo was closing, and people were making their way to the front, and mom and dad were toward the back of the zoo, and not really making sure they're making their way super quickly to the front. And there was a weird guy that was peering around corners and looking at them, and dad swears it was Richard Ramirez. And I think this was around the time in of
Actually, and like it would have been because he was born in 60
yeah,
and went and moved to California when he was 22.
Yep. And
yeah,
he was
And mom and dad got married in 73,
yep. And he
yeah,
was
right?
yeah,
living in LA.
yeah, no, 77. They got married in like 77. Actually, it might
Oh,
not have been their honeymoon. I think it was just a trip out to,
oh yeah, but then I mean it definitely would have been, and yet before it would have been when he would have been there, but before he was
yeah,
known.
yeah. And it might not have been him, but I know it was like one of those things where dad's like, I just got the weird,
Yeah.
creepiest feeling from this guy. And he had like these dark eyes that just had like evil in them and peering around corners at them and everything. And he just had really weird
Well,
vibe. And then I think there was some point where, when his picture was on the news and stuff, where dad said, I think that might have been the guy. But I mean, might
dad
have
is
been,
pretty good
may
with
not have been.
faces too,
Oh
though.
yeah, yeah. And just like in
Yeah.
general, kind of, I mean,
Like
someone like
people.
that probably going to give you a really weird
Yeah.
vibe, and it's like, what's this guy like? So the zoo is closing. You're toward the
Mhm.
back of the zoo, like, and this guy's not making his way to the front. He's creeping around corners, peeking, through bushes and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
watching you as you're kind of gradually, slowly making your way, to the front and still observing some of the animal exhibits. Or I don't know. I think Dad said it was almost creepy, like someone was looking for an opportunity to do something,
Yeah. Well, that is
But
scary. And he did some, I mean, like one of the attacks was a sweet lady was just putting her garage door down and going into
yeah,
her house, and he rolled in under the garage door. She didn't even know it.
yeah,
He was there. So when he was a kid, his dad was just this horrible man. So not condoning that. What an awful, like violent home that he grew up in. And
yeah,
Steve and I were just discussing this too, how it's like horrible things could somehow be good for humanity and
yeah,
good things could be bad. And it's like that. Nobody would ever think like a child dying is good. I'm not saying that. But if it's this sick individual who grew up to senselessly destroy all these other people's lives, would that not have been a good thing
yeah.
for his
No,
life?
That would be a hard thing, like in
But
like
nobody would know
time
it in the time.
travel. If
Mhm.
you're able to time travel and go back and get rid of some of these people, how would you prove that these people were going to be bad people?
And I feel like you couldn't. It would just be like you knew you were doing something for the good of
Yeah,
society, but it would be don't let them hide that gun. Let
yeah.
him
yeah,
get
Well,
it.
well, go to the day he rolled into that lady's garage. Just be
yeah,
waiting
Yeah.
to buy, you know?
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And you have to get your hands dirty. This is wild. Like, you had, 6 million people died in the Holocaust. Do you know how many?
yeah.
Wow. Do you know how many people died in World War II total from war and the Holocaust?
I don't
80,
know.
85 million people died
85 million.
in
Wow.
World War.
I know it
Including
was a
like the
huge number.
bombs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
almost 4% of the world's population. 85 million. I was just wondering, like, because you said, like, how many people would be on Earth, so it got me thinking.
Hmm.
Um, that's the number one deadliest war of all time. Like, but they're going back to like back in
Yeah,
2020, there was a war where 34 million people died. Like, there's been, if you add this up, there's probably close to billions of people have died, right?
yeah,
And just in wars, not just from natural, like from wars. Like, would the world even be inhabitable if there weren't, like, that's grim to say, but like there weren't wars, like,
yeah.
could the world sustain? as many people as there would be. You know, like
Hmm.
34 million people in the year 220. So how many people would have descended from 34 million people that didn't die in the year 220?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
That's how many hundreds of
Crazy. You ever think about if you could like time travel to a place and then just stay there? Where would you go? Would you go with the family? Like, you ever
Oh,
think about like, what if you and Steve and the girls could time travel back to the 1980s and just live there?
I I would say post-war, like the 50s,
The
right? Like
50, that would be cool. Like,
American Dream, right? Like baby boomers all coming back from war. Like if we could be 40 and transplanted at like
yeah,
you
I
see
would
the
just go to the
Beatles, like
90s.
see the
what?
Beatles and Elvis come to greatness
Yeah,
and everything. Like, yeah, a whole different time. That would
yeah.
be,
Yeah,
it'd be fun if you could go like, and go with like the whole family and be like, okay, we're moving to 1955,
Yeah,
like Back to the Future.
yeah,
it's
yeah,
1962. I think Stevie would love it.
Hmm.
yeah. Well, we go 55, and then she could be older, and she'd be old enough to travel the world and follow the Beatles all around.
Yeah,
And
that's true. Well, what
55,
would you do
little
if
head
you could
start
change?
and easy things.
What would you do if
Yeah.
you could change something, Steve?
If I could change something,
Yeah, like interact and change an event.
oh, okay. So, are we ready to jump to that? I got,
Well,
I
yeah.
have,
Yeah.
I have, I have two. The first one is I would stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy because he was killed because he wanted. My belief, anyway, my thoughts on this whole thing is he was killed for wanting to set things much better than they
Hmm.
ended up. Right. So
Yeah.
they say it was Lee Harvey Oswald, just some crazy kook who was a communist and didn't like him. Well, if you really dig into it, it's because he signed an executive order to put the United States back on the silver, not the gold standard, but the silver standard,
Yeah.
and the Federal Reserve, and make money actually worth something. So he signed an executive order, said that we're going to end the Federal Reserve. There's going to be treasury notes. It's only going to be backed by silver, and that pissed a lot of wrong people off, and that's probably why he got killed.
Yeah.
But had he done that, we wouldn't be in $9 trillion of debt because we wouldn't be printing endless money.
Hmm.
Vietnam probably wouldn't have happened the way it happened. All kinds of things. So that's number one, right? So that
Sure.
would have set the financial timeline right. And then number two is in our lifetime is however I could, because after 9/11, the whole world basically went to be quite honest. That was kind of like the pivot point in our lifetime of
Yeah.
where things really changed, like tensions and government overreach and all kinds of stuff. Is so 9/11 doesn't happen. Now we won't get into why 9/11 happened or what it was, but the fact is, if simple going into the World Trade Center in the morning and calling it a bomb threat that morning, right?
Yeah.
They would have evacuated it. Like they probably wouldn't have flown the planes in, or they probably wouldn't have whatever. They probably wouldn't have blown the building up. However, whatever you believe happened, calling a bomb threat on 9/11 to the World Trade Center, stop that from happening. Well, I
Yeah.
think it's a lot different now. We wouldn't have had. We've been in war constantly since then.
Yeah.
Like constantly been in a war since then, one form of fashion. Turmoil, worry. Those are my two. Stop JFK from getting assassinated, whatever that would be. Whether it's just being a crazy guy and running into the parade and making the car speed off, whatever that is, right? That's a whole other podcast of why that happened, right? But
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
make, make,
Totally.
make the bullet miss him one way or another. You
Yeah.
got
Well, so I've thought about that too with JFK, but everybody knows that Lee Harvey Oswald probably didn't do it.
no,
But where did the bullet come from? And if you were to go to that place in time, would you even be able to find the person that actually did it to stop him?
So
no,
we don't
but
think it came from that book depository?
no, no,
No, I don't think so.
no.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of things. There's one they're pretty close to proving it that the either accidentally or on purpose is driver shot
Well, why would they do all that to cover up for some driver?
because the driver was in on it. They weren't covering
Oh,
it up. The
Yeah.
whole it's a whole like it's a CIA outbreak, like CIA, like
okay.
and
I thought you meant he accidentally shot him and then
well,
they.
it said that at one point, like and they said they hit a bump and he pulled the trigger. They say he shot him. There's all different, like that's one of the things, and they pretty good evidence to support that, but you don't know. Again, it goes back to you don't know what is true or not. I could be maybe Lee Harvey Oswald did somehow get 5 shots off with a rickety rifle from an impossible shot. He was a terrible marksman. Like, that's proven. He failed his marksman test in the Marine Corps, and somehow he used a rickety old rifle and
Yeah.
And then him getting killed before he could be questioned.
correct, right? So, but those two, I think if those two things didn't happen, though, I don't want to say the world's not like I'm happy to be here. It's a great place to be. Like, you make the best of life, but I think life would be a lot easier for everybody. I think the way that America was in 1962, where things were affordable, everybody was fairly happy. You know, like, I think that would have continued on.
Well,
And
and there were a lot of like, yes, dark things, right? Like the racism and things like that.
yeah,
But people
that could
like JFK were working to change that and his
correct,
brother. And
correct,
so
and
then
yep,
that
and
would have kept progressing forward.
that would have still progressed because that has nothing to do with the federal, like the money, like the people in
Yeah,
power. You know what I mean? Like, that still would have gotten better. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Um, but those are my two that I came to
Gotcha.
pretty quickly when I saw your question. I'm like, yeah, those two. Like, it was a kind of a no brainer. I'm sure I could think more. Like, obviously the Hitler one, right? Like, stopping Hitler,
Yeah.
And
right?
I didn't know that he almost drowned when he was 4. That is so wild.
A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a
See, I think if he would have died, though, like from someone we recently watched, I think if he would have died, that he was evil, but the people that were like with him, like Himmler and
Right.
Heinrich Himmler, they were all
But they were with him.
right,
They were
but
so empowered because of him.
true. But he came out, so maybe he was in this underground, living in poverty in Germany, right? His whole thing
Mhm.
came from Germans, you know, the working class Germans having to live in poverty. He wasn't just the one guy talking. There was a whole underground movement of that. Like, I think about it, you go back and you time travel, and you know, either you let him drown when he's 4, or you go back and you shoot him in the trenches in World War One, and you come back to the future and you're like, oh, the Holocaust still happened, because I think there was a lot of people like I don't know. I just think, that's the crazy thing is, like, you go do something thinking, oh, this
yeah.
is gonna fix. I go back and not kill JFK on November 14th or whatever day it was, right? But
Yeah.
then he gets killed on December 9th instead. You know, so like,
Yeah.
how do you plug the holes again? You have to travel back, and now it's future. Now we're here. Oh yeah, he still died, but it was 10 days later. Okay, I got to go back again. Like, how far
Yeah.
did go back again and fix it? Let me go back again and fix it. There's
Yeah.
a
I asked that question to Carson. He would go back. So, oh, for people that are listening, Carson's my 16-year-old son that likes to play the guitar and is into music and everything. He would go back to the 60s and join Led Zeppelin.
okay.
So, anyhow, I figured it'd be something music related, would it be Zeppelin? Would you go back and join the Beatles? Would it be AC/DC,
Oh
or
yeah.
whatever? But yeah, so,
If Stevie would stop John Lennon from going out on the balcony, walking out of his apartment that
oh
morning,
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
ask a question afterwards what they would do. So,
yeah, that's crazy. So the other thing I thought we would talk about too, and I know we've been talking for quite a while, but there's a couple of people that a lot of people swear are or were time travelers. Like, they knew too much, various things like that. So the crazy thing is, growing up in Nebraska, where we grew up, not too far away, there was a guy, not too far from like the border of like Nebraska and Missouri, on the Missouri side, and his name was, I guess he's referred to as Madman Mike Markham, and this was in the 90s. So I think it was like mid 90s. I think he was like an electrical engineer. Like his backyard was like an appliance and electronics graveyard. So he had access to just tons of equipment and all kinds of stuff. And he was young. He was like a tinkerer. He was in his 20s. I can't remember the exact year, but I think it was like the mid 1990s or so. So he was making what initially this all started, and he was on a radio program
Yeah,
called Coast to Coast
with
with
Art Bell.
Art Bell.
Yeah.
So where he shared some of his story, but it all started with him making what's called a Jacob's Ladder, which is these, it kind of resembles, in my mind at least, when people explain it in the diagrams and stuff, like those old bunny ears, rabbit ears on top of the TV that they kind of go out, and you get this almost like a lightning bolt or energy that goes from one rod to the other, and it kind of spreads across the wires. So he was messing with some stuff, and normally a house has 110 or 220 volt is what your outlets are. Well, he knew how to step up his voltage at home to like 20,000 volts. He did that to run some experiments, and he was causing, like, it was small town northwest Missouri, and he caused some blackouts and brownouts. And so I think people knew something is up, something's going on in this town. So when he stepped it up to the 20,000 volts, he was getting like this little, maybe 8 inches around. It was like this weird little kind of wavy, almost like a desert mirage when you're driving down the road and you got that wavy heat coming off the road, kind of like a weird disturbance. And he's like, that's really weird. So he throws a sheet metal screw in, and it's just boom, it's gone. And he's like, what the heck? Like, where did that go? And then eventually, when he turns things off, he hears a clanking noise, and the sheet metal screw is a couple feet away. It dropped out of this field or returned to the field. He didn't really know exactly what happened. All he knew is, that's interesting. I think I need to create something with more power, so we can see what we can do, what's going on here. And so he knew where there was a power substation, where there were a couple of transformers that weren't being used. So him and his buddies went and loaded them up in a buddy's truck, and then brought it back to his house and started experimenting with building a bigger one. And then the bigger one was, I can't remember if it was like 80,000 volts or something like that. And it created a bigger disturbance, and they were throwing things in and things would just disappear. And they're like, did we create like some teleporting thing? Did we create some kind of
Those
time
things had to
machine?
go
Or
somewhere,
yeah, it's like, where's this stuff going?
evaporating into thin air.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing I think he didn't know. Is this stuff just like vaporizing, or like, because of all this electricity and all this kind of stuff? So anyhow, it was one of those things around this point that he's like, okay, something weird is going on. Well, of course, creating these blackouts, and then these two transformers missing at the yard, he gets arrested for this. So there is proof that he existed, and there's mugshots of him. And he was arrested for stealing the two transformers and using them and causing the blackouts. But at that point, he knew he was onto something. So he sat in jail for a while, and then when he got out, I think he was talking to Art Bell on this Coast to Coast AM, which was like a nighttime program. And then his story got to enough people that wanted to fund him for some, warehouse. They set up this warehouse in like Kansas City, and they scaled it way up so they could figure out what in the heck, what did he find or figure out. He was putting all kinds of big stuff through, like couches and like even got to the point like guinea pigs and rats and stuff, and things would disappear, and he could vary the voltage and all this stuff. And he got to the point where he could kind of tell how far it would be, the certain voltage or whatever would be. He'd set some things, and then he'd put something through, and he was finding that things were reappearing east or west of his machine a certain amount of feet, or like might be hundreds of feet. And he figured out how to do this. And then he decided at one point, I mean, he had to be a daredevil or whatever. At one point, he adjusted things way up, and he jumped into the disturbance, and he was gone. And then he said, so he's telling the story on Coast to Coast with Art Bell. So obviously he didn't die or anything. He said he woke up like quite a few hundred miles away, due east in Ohio, some suburb like north of Cincinnati, Ohio. So he wakes up hundreds of miles exactly due east 2 years later.
Yeah.
And so he's telling this story. I mean, there is proof that he was doing all this stuff and a lot of benefactors that pumped money into this. It's not like someone just saying that oh yeah, I did all this stuff. Like there were people associated with him and funneling money to him to do this stuff and observing things in the warehouse and observed him jump into the disturbance and then he was gone. And then I think he said where he woke up in this field, he had no money, no nothing. And he's walking and figures out from a newspaper what day it is and realizes 2 years have gone by and he had to try to make his way back to Kansas City. And of course, this is 2 years later. Everyone probably thought, he's long gone. The warehouse is gone. All of his work is gone. And so he was
Is
telling the
he
story
still
to.
alive today?
So I think, so it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if he's still alive today. I don't think he's been active on a lot of stuff. So he would be at an age where he definitely could be alive today because if he was in his 20s in the 1990s,
Well,
then I don't know that he's appeared in anything lately when I looked up some stuff about him. But his story is interesting because this was basically a time machine. So Madman Mike Markham, that's mid '90s. A lot of people believe his story. There's another guy too. His name was John Teeter, and I don't think that was his real name. That was the name he went by on these forums, like around '98 to 2000, 2001. I think initially he introduced himself as John Teeter, like Titor, and then he changed his name on the forums to like Time Traveler Zero. He also faxed some things to Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM, and a lot of his communications on these boards. It's archived on the internet. You can find it, like how all this was in 1998 to 2001 or whatever. I think the original fax came into like Art Bell on July 29th or 1998. So he tells him that he's basically a time traveler from the year 2036, and he says this company CERN invented time travel in 2034, and he goes into all these details and how the time machine works and everything, and like heavy scientific jargony stuff that he's talking about. But I think he said the main reason initially that he was coming back was he was trying to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer from the year 1975. And a lot of people are like, well, what the heck? Like, why would you be coming to get a computer from 1975? And at this point, it was mentioned that very few people even knew that that specific computer, like the like designers and developers for this computer or for some of the software on it knew some of the secrets of it, and it was like been highly desired by NASA, but it was like hush hush. There were things in there that it was capable of. And he mentioned the reason he was coming back to get that was that it was needed to debug some Unix computer programs that were going to go haywire in the year 2038. So people were like, okay, this is kind of weird. But the way it was explained was like how Y2K was supposed to be. You know, when they talked about, oh, Y2K, all these computers are going to crash, oh, the world's going to go into haywire and everything, all this stuff, crazy stuff is going to happen. He was basically saying this is what he was trying to fix and debug this stuff. And that specific computer was needed, and that chip, because it had some debugging processes in it. He explained it like sort of like like Y2K, where the computer wouldn't be able to recognize going to 00 for the year. He was mentioning how some of the main computer programs count in seconds. So seconds since how many seconds has it been since the starting of this software when things were initiated? And they were talking about this 32-bit system. When some scientists actually looked at what he was saying, they're like, yeah, that 32-bit system everything had been based on would only get you to Tuesday, January 19th, 2038. And then everything may just crash. And so, like, the things he was saying, people were checking this stuff out, and they're like, this is stuff that just is so random that nobody would think
Yeah.
about this stuff.
Where would
Or,
he come up with that?
they're like, oh, wow, okay, this has some capability to debug and fix some of these issues. Like, if you were coming from the future, you're not going to mention something like that, not coming back for a computer from 1975 to go back and fix some issues or debug some stuff to keep things from majorly crashing
2038.
everything in the world
Mm.
or whatever. It was needed to, I think he said, debug legacy code and fix a bunch of stuff. But then as people looked into it, they're like, oh, that computer around that time or a couple years later, NASA was looking for those computer chips too because of certain capabilities that it had. So he's mentioning these things. A couple years later, NASA is now wanting these chips for that reason, or for some, other reasons. It was kind of a crazy deal, really. But then he's on these boards and he's talking with some people, and he mentions a lot of stuff about time travel and explaining it. It was interesting because he's explaining it like a traffic cone or something like that, where the top is really narrow and the bottom is a lot wider. He's like, time travel is sort of the same way, the way he was explaining it. He said, if you're not going very far in time, you don't have much variance or much ability to change the whole, timeline. But if you're going, like, if you were going much further, it's sort of like things fan out and all kinds of different things can happen. It was really kind of one of those things that, as you're listening to some of this stuff, and I think you can find recordings from Art Bell of him talking. But this guy, John Teeter, he said back then that we were going to have civil war in the U.S. in like 2004, and in 2015 we were going to have World War III, and like 3 billion people were going to die. And after that, the U.S. was going to split into 5 different regions, each with its own president that answered to a weaker central government. He said one of the other things that he was sent back to do was, in his time, mad cow disease was rampant and like a major thing. And so he was also sent back to, I don't know if he was sent back to solve something with that or figure, something out to try to prevent that or whatever. But then when you think about some of these things he was talking about, then we were starting to hear about mad cow disease around that time. And then now we don't. You haven't heard anything about that in ages.
Yeah,
So there are
around
all these weird
Thanksgiving.
little things where people are like, well, he's mentioning all this stuff that some of it seems like it could possibly check out. Who
Yeah.
knows? And there's no way to prove any of that stuff really. But he
It's
disappeared from
interesting.
the message boards that he had been active on. I think his last message was in March of 2001. So for a couple years, he's active on these boards. He's in this time when he's like, yeah, I came from 2036, and he's mentioned, I think, that he was in the military, and him and some other people were sent back. I think he said he was one of 7 people sent back to retrieve those computers. Then again, you think about, you need to retrieve a computer from 1975. Why aren't you going back closer to 1975?
Yeah.
But I don't
And
know.
all the other stuff that he said was going to happen happened.
Yeah, the other stuff he said hasn't happened, but he also said he was sent back to prevent a lot of things. So did he get the computers he needed, and did he do something, whatever he was supposed to do with like mad cow disease, or help get that eradicated, and did it change the whole timeline and none of this stuff then happened?
Yeah.
I mean, that could be sort of like the Hitler thing. He drowns and the Holocaust doesn't happen, it's like he comes back, he does a couple of things if he was indeed a time traveler, and all of a sudden World War III doesn't happen.
the Civil War doesn't happen, the
Yeah,
United States
I
doesn't
mean, yeah, that's
disintegrate.
the
But
Civil War. And I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's interesting stuff, really, when it
okay,
comes
what
down to it.
about for the next one? Nostradamus.
For
Nostradamus.
Nostradamus, you know what? I don't know if I've got him on the list.
Do you
I need to
do you
put that
remember
on the
when we
list.
were younger and you would bring him up and I would be like, "Don't talk about that. It's so
Yeah,
scary. I can't stand
yeah.
it."
Well,
So we'll close it out with are the Trumps time travelers? So, and I know Steve was mentioning some of this, but when Nikola Tesla died in 1943 in New York City, so he had, I think he was said to have like 80 trunks of papers and inventions and all of this stuff in his place. So the government sent John G. Trump, who is Donald Trump's uncle. He was an electrical engineer from MIT, and he was working for the government's National Defense Research Committee. So he was sent to retrieve all of Tesla's documents and everything and go through everything. And I think it was said after that that he had mentioned that a lot of the stuff that he retrieved, he said, yeah, a lot of his later stuff was just a lot of speculative stuff and it wasn't very good, which you find kind of hard to believe because Tesla was a
A
genius.
genius,
You
yeah.
know, he did all this genius work, and then at the end, his work that he had around him wasn't very good. It is a little bit mysterious. So he goes, he retrieves all this stuff, and then there's a book that was written prior, like
Mm-hmm.
in 1896, which is really crazy. So this book was titled Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. And it's a book about time traveling, this Baron Trump time traveling. And of course, Baron Trump is Donald Trump's son's name. So a lot of people are like, this is crazy. This book mentions a bunch of things with the Trump family and stuff like that. In the book, it was supposed to be just fiction, but in the book, Baron Trump's mystic or father, his name is Don.
Mm-hmm.
So this book is written in 1896. You know, suppose Tesla did
Yeah.
have a time machine or drawings and all this stuff on how to do it. And suppose
It's like,
John G. Trump does.
oh, I don't know if that'll work, but
Oh yeah,
I'm trying to, oh, here,
yeah.
hold
It
on.
was cutting in and out a little. But
Yeah.
if you think about it, if you were a time traveler, if John then figured out how to travel in time, traveled
Mhm.
back, wrote this book. We don't know at what point he would have traveled back in time, but you write a book, you publish it before,
In the
you know,
1800s.
before all of these things happen. It's kind of
Do
crazy.
they think the whole Trump family are, or just Barron?
I, you know, I don't know. It's just people look at that and say it's just kind of a weird,
It
yeah.
is
mysterious,
very.
thing. Look, can that all be coincidence? You know, like John G. Trump and his association with Tesla, who was working on a time machine,
And then
and
he
then
gets the
this
trunk.
book that mentions Baron Trump,
His,
Donald's,
his grandson
Donald's
was born
son. And
more than 100 years after when the book was written.
There were actually three books written by Ingersoll Lockwood. One
yeah,
was called Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. The other one was Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, and the last one was 1900 or the Last President.
yeah, crazy.
Yep.
Wow.
You know,
Well,
yeah, one of those kind of weird deals. I mean, no one will ever know, but it's just it could just be a bunch of weird coincidences.
Donald Trump read that book when he was young and said, "Oh, I'm
Yeah,
Don. I'm in New York. I'm going to name my son Baron."
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, totally. Could be a
hi,
Yeah.
deal like
Steve.
that too. Like, oh, I
No.
like that name. Yeah, I'm gonna name
Yeah.
him Baron.
Well, thank you so much for having us,
Yeah.
Dust.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
was
it's fun.
fun.
We'll come up with some more ideas to keep doing some more.
Okay.
So I should be doing. I'm working on a few more. I think Cody and I are gonna soon be doing an episode about the scariest situations that you've been in or anything unexplainable that you've seen or
Is that
things like that.
is it when he fell into his fell nuts deep in the lake at Keister's Lake. That's pretty scary.
He said he said he has some good stuff that I probably don't know about. I definitely have some things he doesn't know about, so it should be a lot of fun, when we get
Nice.
together and do that too. So anyhow, yeah, I'm working on a few. I want to get the channel going pretty well and get some good videos on there and just different random topics and stuff like that. This was fun to talk about, and we'll come up with some more good ones. I have pages of ideas. Anyhow, it should be a lot of fun, and we'll have to do some more topics. But anyhow, I'll shoot you some different ideas, and there might be one that sounds like a lot of fun to do.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys. I'll see ya.
Bye. Bye.